Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us in this event, Pursuing Climate Justice in a Climate Crisis, which is part of the Learning Planet Festival. We're very excited to have you all here and to have this wonderful group of panelists today. This event is a joint project of the Center for Science and the Imagination and the Storying Just Futures project at Arizona State University. And ASU is also the flagship hub for the UNESCO Bridges Sustainability Coalition. And we're grateful to all of our partners and collaborators for helping to make this possible and to you for coming to join us today. So my name is Ed Finn. I'm the founding director of the Center for Science and the Imagination. And we've been working on this question of climate futures for a long time here at CSI. And throughout that process, over a decade of global writing competitions and fellowships and public events and publications, we keep coming back to this question of how do we change our relationship with climate to one of hope. Obviously, there are a lot of bad things happening. There are grim tidings on the horizon, and I'm not here to discount any of that. But if we only spend our time imagining the worst, or imagining how bad things are going to get, we're not going to motivate the kind of transformational change we need in the present to get to adaptation, resilience, finding new ways for human flourishing in the context of a changing world. So that was the spirit in which we launched the Climate Imagination Fellowship and are now celebrating the publication of this fine-looking volume available at booksellers everywhere, and also freely available online, open access through our publishers, MIT Press. So I hope you take some time to check it out. The premise of this book was very much how can we start to tell stories of climate resilience, hope, and new narratives that explore the futures that we want. Those futures are still going to have climate change in them. It's not like there's going to be some magic wand that gets waved and all of these challenges will suddenly disappear. But that doesn't mean that we can't find new ways to thrive and to imagine the futures of our communities. And that's a second central tenet of this approach. This is a very much a global book project, a global conversation, and we asked writers and contributors from around the world to imagine these hopeful climate futures in their context, in particular geographical settings and regions. There's not going to be a one-size-fits-all answer to how we navigate the challenges of this coming century. We're going to need lots of different stories, lots of different answers, and many of those stories and those answers exist already. They exist in indigenous communities and local practices, cultural histories from different places around the world, where communities have known for a long time how to deal with different kinds of challenges. And the stories that they tell about their pasts are also the stories that can inform their futures. So it's been a really exciting project to work on, and we're really thrilled to have some of our contributors to join us in conversation today. And I'm going to hand things over in a minute to our moderator, my colleague, Joni Adamson. Joni is President's Professor of Environmental Humanities in the Department of English here at ASU, where she is also a Distinguished Global Futures Scholar at the Julie Ann Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory. She is the co-editor of the book Eco-Criticism and Indigenous Studies, Conversations from Earth to Cosmos, and the founding director of the flagship hub of UNESCO Bridges Sustainability Science Coalition. So, and I'll just briefly introduce our other speakers as well and then hand things over to Joni. Libia Brenda is an editor, writer, translator, two-time Hugo Award nominee, and also the first Mexican woman to be nominated for a Hugo. She is the author of the short story collection De Que Silencio Vienes and the editor of Odo Ediciones, an independent nonprofit and crowd-funded editorial project that publishes science fiction, fantasy, and speculative fiction from Mexico. Azucena Castro is an assistant professor in the Department of Modern and Classical Languages, Literatures and Cultures at Rice University. She developed her work on multi-species justice and decolonial futures at the Stockholm Resilience Center, Stanford University, and the University of Buenos Aires. She is the author of Poetic Post-Natures, Ecological Thinking and Politics of Strangeness in Contemporary Latin American Poetry. Chinelo Onwalu is a Nigerian writer and editor living in Toronto. She's currently buried under 2 feet of snow. She is the co-host of Griots and Galaxies, a podcast about African speculative fiction and the people who write it that we're delighted to be the hosts of here at CSI. She was the founder of Omenana, a magazine that publishes speculative fiction from Africa and the African diaspora. She edited the book Ex Marginalia, an anthology of essays by writers of color in speculative fiction. And finally, my colleague Jennifer Richter is an associate professor in the School for the Future of Innovation and Society and the School of Social Transformation here at ASU. We do like our long titles. She is also a senior global futures scholar at the Julian Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory. She studies how policies that govern innovations and research are created and then taken up by local populations, especially in the American West. She co-authored the book Environmental Realism, Challenging Solutions, and is a contributor to our other new book, which I didn't grab a copy of, but it's great and freely available. Oh, Jen's got it. This book has the best title of any of our books recently, Our Radioactive Neighbors, a collection of speculative fiction and nonfiction essays in relation to nuclear waste storage. So thank you all for being here. Without further ado, over to you, Joni.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ed. And it's just a pleasure for me representing Storing Just Futures, a project that we're currently conducting at ASU, to be working with the Center for Science and Imagination. And I want to thank Joey Estridge and Liron Ariely and Shreya Oman for all the work they did to organize this session between our two entities. Story and Just Future was launched last year along with my colleague Jen Richter because we wanted to respond to graduate student concerns about the fact that pretty much all of our funding was canceled. And we were working on some just transition, just energy transition projects, and all our funding was canceled. And we didn't want our students to give up hope or to feel disempowered by what was going on in the political landscape. And so we created this project, Just Storing Futures, which obviously takes so much inspiration from the Center for Science and Imagination and their new book, the Climate Imaginations, Dispatches from a Hopeful Future. And so I'm going to start this session by asking all of the panelists to answer the following question, which gets right to the heart of the theme of Dispatches from a Hopeful Future. And that is that we probably are all aware that our popular and public imaginations about climate and future typically are dominated by narratives of catastrophe, warning, and apocalypse. So we want to start out by just asking all of the panelists briefly, what role can more hopeful stories play, and how do we balance our duty to treat grave risks and disasters with visions of the future that stress hope, cooperation, and justice? So why don't we start with you, Azucena?
Thank you so much, Joey, Ed, and Johnny for this invitation. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you to share some thoughts on climate justice. And to go directly to your question, Johnny, I think that we need to think of the effect that these catastrophic narratives produce on people, because they tend to stress individual solution, survivalism, militarization to cope with chaos that these disasters and risks produce. So I think that that's a pretty serious effect on the mind of people and on the kind of solutions that these narratives propose. So I think that balancing those kinds of representations with more hopeful futures projects futures that are also not just hopeful, but also diverse in the types of solutions that we can give to the climate crisis. These can lead to more collective forms of understanding how we came to be here, but also forms of co-building different kinds of futures, because I think that these catastrophic narratives also tend to project an idea that there's no way out of that catastrophe, and that is very powerful in the mind of people. So more hopeful narratives, or narratives with a diversity of futures and a diversity of solutions, come visualize that these other non-hegemonic narratives can open up this catastrophic ending for more other types of futures, a diversity of futures.
Next, we'll go to Libya.
So I find this question a little bit huge because it's a lot of responsibility, you know. Writers are people that are in a room like this, like me, hearing voices all day and sitting trying to do something with all those voices. But I think one of the keys can be imagination, but other key can be also to know that if you like catastrophic narratives in, I don't know, movies, for, you know, this is a very clear example. It's okay. It's like, it's just a movie. The point is to know the distinction between going to the movies and eating popcorn and have entertainment, and the different thing is your daily life and the world we are living in. So I think about the hopeful narratives, because, you know, I and a lot of other people that we write based on hope and based on imagining a future in which every living thing thrives and it doesn't just survive. We need to build communities. We need diversity, as Azucena said. We need also to know that it's a hard job, it's a hard work we have ahead of us, but we can do it. Because as human beings, number one, we need the communal part of us, and we also need to be conscious of our moment in history and also our moment and our place in the world. And I think the hope is, it can be in art also, and it can be in reality, and we can make bridges between those two things. Art and life are not two separated things. So it's not about just consuming one type of art, you know. It's not about, oh, I'm not going to go to Mad Max movies or whatever. It's about, okay, I can write a story in which there is hope. I can try to build community and to have a life in which I integrate those ideas in my life. And I can go to the movies or to some books or to, I don't know, video games, and I have a nice time and it's cathartic. It's okay. But I think hope, it's very deep. And I think hope, it can be, you know, literally rooted in many things. And one of those things is listening to other narratives that are not only built by white male dudes that have a lot of money. I think that is important. I am from Mexico, which is in Latin America, which means that I am the product of colonization in many ways. The fact that I am speaking in English and not in Spanish is a byproduct of that colonization. I'm very happy to be here. I'm really glad that I can share the space with all these wonderful people. I am eternally grateful with Edwin and with Joy Eckridge and with everybody in the Center for Science and the Imagination, because the fellowship that provoked the book that we are going to talk about, it's about that sharing and that open view. So I think the problem is that we are living in a historical moment that is pivotal. AI, the building of a lot of things that make us believe that the world is ending. And in some way, the world ended in the pandemic, or the world is ending right now. But at the same time, we are here and we are alive, and we can make things alive with our imagination. I don't know if that makes sense. English is my second language, but yeah, in short, I think that is one of the points.
Thank you, Libya. And let's move on to Chinelo.
So, I find this a very interesting question because when I talk about climate, action, or what it means to hope, I think of it from a particular point of view, which is, so Nigerians have this understanding. It's called suffering and smiling. It was encapsulated in a verse by Fela in the 1970s. Fela is a major musician out of Nigeria, and the concept of suffering and smiling is this idea of gritty, cheerful optimism in the face of annihilation, in the face of nihilism, in the face of utter devastation. And it's this idea that even if the world is burning around you, even if, you know, flood, fire is happening, you still have to get up and make dinner for make breakfast for your kids. You still have to figure out how you're going to educate them. You still have to figure out how you're going to get through your day to day. And I think that it is this sort of reckless optimism that even when the world ends, there's still tomorrow and you still have to live in the today. And I think it's something that comes out of our own history of like basically the apocalypse. When you when I see, you know, these like speculative fiction stories coming out of the West that are like, oh, the aliens showed up and like took half the people away. Well, that was slavery. That was the experience for Africans of chattel slavery. You would be walking down the street and some alien looking guy would show up and steal your sister and you would never see her again. Or the idea of like, oh, we are under occupation from these like supernatural forces that are erasing our language. And like, that's colonialism. So when we think of dystopia, the stories that imagine what is the worst that could happen, I find it a little disingenuous because they're often these stories in which the West is imagining itself in browner, in poorer countries, and how would they deal with it if that was them. And the problem with dystopia is that those visions they often get it wrong, right? When the West thinks that of the fall of civilization, it's Mad Max. I think Adeshina mentioned, but those of us who live in, let's say, a place that has no power, right? Our societies did not fall apart. We figured out generators, we figure out, alternate forms of generating power. If you are in a place where the water goes out, you figure out where the nearest spring or borehole is and you go and fetch water. So the idea that somehow if these comforts of the West fall apart in the face of, let's say, climate devastation, we will be reduced to eating each other. That's just not how that works. What we found is you develop and adopt a radical optimism that you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but you've still got to survive it. You develop community, right? You check in on your neighbors. You make sure that if you have something, somebody else also has. Even in the worst of these things, people have found ways to survive. And so for me, the question isn't about disasters and gravity or versus hope. It's both. You have to acknowledge the reality that things are bad. Things are probably going to get worse. We don't necessarily know how we're going to get out of it, but we cannot cede that hope. We cannot cede the future to despair because we still have to survive. And so sometimes I think there is a sense that if we lose the comforts that these unequal systems have bought us, if we lose the insulation that these systems of exploitation, of patriarchy, of colonialism, of neocolonialism, of white supremacy, that it will mean the end of all things. And so I think that turning towards hope isn't simply an exercise in how do we do things differently. literally is what we have to do to survive. But we will survive. The question is, do we survive to create something better, which is where we look at, or do we just continue to, survive day to day in what we have, right? And so I think that the call is really for more imagination and more, has been said, a diversity of solutions, but more importantly, an imagination that doesn't see the end of what we have as the end, because it's not going to be. Other peoples have survived apocalypse. Other peoples have survived genocide. Other peoples have survived erasure. How have they done it? What did they do? What did they turn to? What kinds of viewpoints and ideas have those who have survived the end of the world as they knew it adopt so that they could continue to be here today? So when we're looking for stories of hope or resilience, they're all around us already. I'm not sure we necessarily have to pull from, the sky. We just have to stop listening to the same people who keep telling us that if we are not in charge, if things don't remain exactly as it is, everything will end. It will be bunkers, will be, stealing babies to cook them on trains that run forever. Like it's ridiculous. So I think that what we need is more of like a widening of our own imaginations and an understanding that the end is not the end. We will figure this out. We are figuring it out. We are turning to new things. We just have to keep on at it. Keep on at it. Take it day by day.
That's beautiful. I'll just throw in one of the writers that the Storying Just Futures group is studying is Walida Imarisha, and she calls the work that she studies visionary fiction because she said she wanted to sort of separate it from the idea that maybe of apocalyptic fictions and really study the work of writers who understand social movements that have taken place in what some might call already the apocalypse. If your people were colonized, say 500 or 300 years ago, it's been the apocalypse for 300 years. And so you have many stories of survival. And so Walida Imarisha sort of coined the term visionary fiction to talk about writers and characters that are part of social movements that have been working on these kinds of things for forever, or hundreds of years. So thank you so much, Shanella, and let's move to Jen.
Yeah, thank you. That was really beautiful put. It's hard to follow up these three panelists. But I'll just say from my work, and I'm a scholar of science and technology studies, but also energy justice. My work has been on how we conceptualize the back end of the nuclear fuel cycle, and nuclear waste is something that just you have to start thinking many, many thousands of years ahead. And I'm always impressed by how uniquely unsuited the society that produced that waste is about thinking ahead, right? We live in this moment will stay true forever. We never have to imagine a different future because it will never change, which is like the one thing that has to happen. Like change is consistently happening all the time. You cannot stay still, and you cannot go back to this halcyon past where everything was okay. Where like most of the people on this panel would be erased and invisible and not even mentioned in any of these kinds of, stepping stones to this incredible utopian future. So I think the stories of hope, to go to that question, it's really important because I think about my Indigenous students and scholars and friends and how they are resisting the idea of damage-centered research, where we keep cataloging all of the apocalypses, personal, professional, institutional, national, et cetera. And then we don't go to where do we find hope? Where do we find the energy to keep moving forward, to pick up our feet every day and take care of the people we love around us in our communities? And then I deal with the other side of this from the energy industry, where they have all the solutions to all our problems. And none of those are actually true. None of those can happen either without a huge amount of institutional help that they completely ignore and have usually decimated, striven very hard to decimate that kind of institutional regulatory apparatus that might even protect many diverse futures. So how do you find a line in between? And these are where I think the hopeful stories are really important. To build on Chanella's point, the success stories are everywhere. It's just success cannot be measured by being profitable or being efficient. And that's constantly what's put in front of us. That this doesn't make a ton of money. If you can't scale up to 10 billion people, what is the point? And I love taking that rhetorical question. So why even bother, right? That rhetorical question is really important because it's never rhetorical. Like, why do we bother? And there's a reason why people bother to fight and why they don't give up and why they say this is unacceptable. And they will mass 50,000 people in sub-zero degree temperatures to say this is wrong, right? We know this is wrong and we know there's a different future and we really want to get to it if we can be allowed to do that. And so I think these hopeful stories open up those spaces where people can start to talk about those specific steps to create these more desirable futures. Like as someone in the desert, I hope that I'm in Phoenix and Tempe area. I'm like, I hope Mad Max isn't prescient about our future, but there can be an interesting way to think about the parched desert and how 5 million people will have to face that collectively. So I think for me, the hopeful stories really bring out this issue of three points that I'm always harping on in justice studies, which is responsibility, obligation, and accountability. And this idea that you are always obligated to yourselves, to your future, to your children, to your children's children. You are accountable to that next generation. We cannot forget them. They're always there. And then we're responsible for actions today. And we have to figure out ways that those actions don't negatively affect their future, to constrain them from doing what they want to do. I think about this with my own son, who's 8 years old. I just saw Chinila's little girl wandering through. And I think about that for our students. Like, I have no right to be hopeless because I am here and I am in a secure space, and I have to make sure that they are also able to think about a space where they can think as brilliantly as they possibly can. And I have to keep that space open. And so these stories are so incredible and so important to make sure that we hold those spaces, even when we're told they're unimportant, they're non-profitable, they're a waste of time, they're a waste of space. It's always worth the engagement. I'm always even more committed when someone tells me I'm wasting my time. I'm like, well, that's my time to waste. That's not yours. So I'll just keep doing what I'm going to do here, and hopefully I'll keep those spaces open.
Thanks, Jen. Those words were so powerful, and we couldn't use them more right now and for the entire year, but especially in the last month. So thank you very much for that. I'm the co-editor of a book called Keywords for Environmental Studies. So I like to call myself the queen of keywords. And no, just joking. But keywords are so important to our stories. And so I'm wondering if you all could just briefly sort of say what climate justice means to you. And maybe you have a story or an illustration, maybe it's fictional, maybe it's real world, about what climate justice means to you. And we'll sort of switch this up. We'll start with Libya this time.
Thank you, Johnny. What a climate justice means to me. I have been thinking of this for days. I think, number one, the problem is capitalism. So I think it's a huge issue also. If capitalism prevails, the climate justice is never going to really reach us. So we need to change our systems in plural, and we need to change our economical systems and our social structures in order to really build together a different world. Now, this that I am saying sounds like science fiction, of course. It's like, ha, ha, ha. But at the same time, I think there is a lot of different ways of living that we are probably not seeing in the mass media or in these like dystopian narratives. So I think climate justice starts for listening to the people that defends the earth, los defensores de la tierra. Here in Latin America, there is this a lot of people that is activist towards the climate. And also, I think we need multidisciplinary ways of working. It's not just the scientists over here and the, I don't know, the artists over there, for instance. It's about building together a world that doesn't collapse over itself. So climate justice involves a lot of different areas. It's not just about the nature, for instance. And the economic part of that is very important too, because who has the money and where does that money goes and how is used, I don't know, the public money, for instance. So I think it's also very complicated because there is a lot of people working towards climate reparation and different ways of living. But if we are not built, if we don't build that as a society, as a community, and as a group of different communities, it's very difficult to really reach a different goal. So I don't know, listening to different ways of seeing the same problem is one of the things I think it can help us. It's not just listening to the people on power. It's like trying to find different information and find different points of view, and trying to have common sense. Try to not close yourself, and try to not just listening one version of the story, in ways of listening to people that lives in other countries, in other environments, and try to be sensitive to what other types of living, like Chinelo was saying, we have survived before, and the world is really, really diverse, and we need to be more open to that diversity and integrate that diversity in our solutions. It's not a problem that is going to be solved in 5 minutes, in 5 years, we wish, but it's not an unsolvable problem. We are not going to go back in time. That doesn't exist, but we can build different things from now to the future. So we need to work together, I think, and climate justice in part is that togetherness and that awareness, I think.
Thank you. Jen, could we have you go next?
Sure. Yeah, I think for me, I'm just going to talk about two of the stories from our radioactive neighbors, because one of the reasons I really love this book, and one of the reasons I really wanted to do the project, was because it talks about it. We commissioned 4 speculative fiction authors, to write about the near future in the United States of communities living with interim nuclear waste sites, which we don't have right now for high-level nuclear waste. And one of the stories is called Generating Hope. And I love this story as someone who got her PhD at the University of New Mexico. And New Mexico is a really special place in general. It's the most beautiful state. But also it is for nuclear studies, like the alpha and omega of nuclearism. The first bomb was detonated there. It's still remains the only nuclear waste site in the world for permanent repository. And so in this story, the author, Carter Merland, is looking at a community of a family who is from Laguna Pueblo. And Laguna Pueblo hosts one of the largest uranium mine tailings piles in the United States that has yet to be addressed from the 1970s, so still causing lots of legacy issues. In this story, every American has been given like 2.5 kilograms of nuclear waste in a casket that they have to keep at their house. That's like the utilitarian principle. We all benefit now. We all have to take little of this waste. But for this particular family, it goes back the 3 generations of people who were miners, people now serving in the military, which is a really important form of social mobility, especially in rural places like New Mexico. And then the granddaughter, Hope. And so this really beautiful story looks at it from the perspective of uranium. So again, thinking about this climate future, not as something just for humans, but to think about all of the non-human actors and stakeholders that we often just see as, part of the landscape, but are actually exerting their power on us at all times, and trying to articulate what that power might look like from the view of uranium that's been lying in the earth for so many millennia, hundreds of millions of years, and now all of a sudden is being activated for this one very weird purpose, which is to make weapons. And so at the end, trying to find some sort of way that the granddaughter can talk to the dying grandmother through the uranium itself generates this hope for the future, that we need to keep having these kinds of conversations. And that to me is a really great climate justice story, like just to have that space to think about this in a very personal way that's also very culturally affecting for Indigenous communities in the Southwest of the United States. And then also thinking about how these places were inscribed in one way at one point in one instantiation of humanity. And then even though the waste is still there, how that place will change over time is really fascinating too. So I'll just say there's another story called Pursuant to the Agreement. And I love that story because one thing I don't think Americans are very good at thinking about this idea of like, oh my God, it's an apocalypse, because America doesn't do revolutions openly like many other countries have, even though we've had many of them, is this issue of, in this story, Calexit happens. So California has separated itself from the rest of the Union. And when we were talking about this story 3 years ago, it seemed like, well, that's never going to happen. And now, 3 years later, we're like, we have to take this question seriously as nation states begin to disintegrate or fall apart. What replaces that? What comes after the nation state? And then how do you legislate something as tricky as intergenerational for so many hundreds of thousands of years as something like nuclear waste? Like, again, how do we explain to the future what we were trying to do in the past? And there's no cloud, there's no databases, there's no center. We didn't write anything down because we're going to keep it all in our data centers. How do we actually communicate those values to the future in a way that they can actually make sense out of it? And probably most importantly for me, not hate us as a result, not be like, why didn't you guys take any responsibility for what you were doing back then when you knew what was happening? And that's going to be the most devilish question to keep answering today and then far into that. Even just thinking just in a capitalist society 100 years in the future is impossible to imagine, right? You can ask somebody 1926 when America would look like in 2026, not even close. Now we're trying to think about what happens in 2126. It's really, really fascinating. And so I love this idea of the justice climate as an idea that we can actually take this as an object and all collectively discuss it together to figure out what kind of desirable futures we do want to achieve, what we want to strive for, and then think about what really blocks us from getting to those places.
So I think instead of going sticking to the term environmental justice, I think what we'll do is we'll switch to another question, because we only have about 20 more minutes for our group discussion, and then we'll transition to the audience. But so let's just move on to another question that is about rights of nature. And I think I think it would make sense to ask Azucena this question, because I think that your book, I haven't read your book, but I'd love to read your book. I think your book probably deals with this. And it's an issue that we've been hearing and learning a lot about over the last years. I have researched this issue myself. And it's the idea that, that legal venues will consider the rights of nature. And by rights of nature, we mean the rights of legal personhood, and legal personhood in a court of law means standing. So the idea that we would give nature, non-human entities, whether it's a forest or a whole ecosystem, legal standing in court. So what role might thinking of non-human beings and systems in terms of personhood and rights play in achieving climate justice? And I'm wondering if Janello could then respond to whatever Azucena says about rights of nature. I'm wondering if this is something you've thought about as well. Go ahead, Azucena.
Thank you so much. I think that the effects of thinking of rights of nature, the effects it has had in legislation, at least in Latin America, is that there's legal protection. It has pushed the boundaries of legal protection to include rivers as bodies, considering them the same as humans or collectives of humans, mountains and pieces of land, but also not just considering them as beings to be protected from a legal point of view, but also considering them as ancestors and spirits, as persons in or from indigenous and Afro-Indigenous understandings of the land and on Earth. And that has had lots of effects in the way we understand the other beings we cohabit the planet with. But it has also had the effect in the way it's necessary to protect these places as also sacred places. And it has also acknowledged that local communities that live there are the stewards of these places and communicate with these places. They become with these places in a relational way or in a relational manner. They are with the places. And I think that has had an enormous effect on how we think of the environment in a different way. At the same time, there are ways also in which those laws protect particular places. But if we consider the knowledges that come from Afro-Indigenous communities, it's the earth doesn't have boundaries like that. So you cannot protect this mountain, but then produce extractivism at the side of the mountain. Or you cannot protect this river, but have lots of electricity producing the river next to it. So I think that the challenge is now to open this idea of rights of nature for a more planetary way of thinking or about the commons that is not tied to maybe this conservationist idea that we have to preserve a particular place, but open it to as a more broader conversation about protecting the commons where we all live. And that's a challenge in the political environment we live now, and it has been a challenge to move, I think, away from this more conservationist way of protection, and I think that in that sense, art and cultural products can help us in ways in which we can think of the planet as a way we cohabit with other beings in a more multi-species. And I'm gonna throw this keyword that I use in the chapter in the book, in a more multi-species way of cohabitation, that it is not just consider animals and plants or the ones that we consider charismatic, but also the ones that we don't like or dislike or consider pests or aggressors or invaders. And I think that there maybe agroecological discourses can help rights of nature to move towards a direction where we have ways of producing food or producing energy that does not produce that kind of damage to the environment as the way in which capitalist society focuses on profit. Maybe Chinelo wants to.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, earlier, Chinelo, you were speaking about the limitations of Western philosophies when it comes to, maybe notions like rights of nature. And so I was wondering what you might want to add to what Azucena just said.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because 100% agree. Like the idea of personhood and the ideas of you know rights assigned really does come out of this sense of like there is a overarching body, and that's usually human, and then we get to give rights to these people or take them away as and that comes out of that like imperialist sort of idea, philosophy of domination, in which the hierarchical beings, those on top dominate those on the bottom, and then do you treat them well or you do not treat them well, whereas I think one thing I'm starting to do some research into is indigenous beliefs, specifically of my own people, of the Igbo people of Nigeria. And so these are ways and knowledge systems that have deliberately been erased by colonial violence. And in those systems of understanding, you cannot confer rights because the rights are inherent. You cannot declare personhood because it would be like saying, I am now going to a river and telling the river is wet. And the river should be grateful that I have acknowledged its wetness. It's still, it doesn't quite sit. The way that, at least in indigenous systems, the ways that I come to understand it is that these were not viewed as systems or environments outside of ourselves, they were part and parcel of how we understood existence. And so the idea, at least in Igbo culture, there is an idea of like constant contract and agreement in which, you know, you, in order to live on a particular piece of land, you have to make a contract with that land as if it was an equal party. So you agree that you will study the land, you will work towards its best intent, and in return, the land will allow you to thrive on it. It is a system of thinking that negates extractivism. It doesn't even consider extractivism. It cannot consider. It cannot conceptualize ownership in a way of thinking like that, because this is literally an equal party in which you are coming into contract with. So when you violate the contract of the land you're living on, you are literally cutting off your own feet, and then you will be surprised when you fall down. So the idea almost is that granting personhood. So we've had this legal system that was imposed on us, right? That was Western based and owners based, and came out of a long history of peasantry, came out of a long history of feudalism, systems that we did not have. And so we did not conceptualize land as something that one person owns and then allows another person rights to. It is a form of understanding in which the land itself is a fellow living being to which you have to be in contract, the way you would be in contract with your brother, your sister. So you have obligations to the land has obligations to you. You can ask the land of things. It does not necessarily need to answer. And if the land refuses, having all these complicated systems of understanding what the land wants, if the land refuses you, you have to accept that, in the same way that if you ask your brother to lend you money and your brother says no, what are you going to do? Beat your brother? You have to. So it's a conception of nature itself, not even as adversarial, not even as something to take over, but literally as something to be in relationship with. So in a way, I think it's interesting because indigenous traditions in North America are much more reciprocal and much more about stewardship and a sense that you are here to, and you are part of this land and you are a living part of it. We have a way of seeing it as we are separate from the land in a way, but obligated to the land in its care for us. And it's a real sense of symbiosis, that these two creatures are coming together and have to work for their mutual benefit, right? You take care of it, it will take care of you. In that way, it assumes that the environment that it is embedded in is as conscious, is as autonomous as you are. And I think that's a very radical re-understanding of the relationship. It's one that I see practiced almost side by side, where you have like people who think of their environments as something that they have to take care of, but have to sit it beside a legal system that was imposed and based on ownership. So very often I see these clashes where families will go to, court because somebody owns the house that they built their family home on. Somebody wants to take over, but we don't understand family houses as ownership rather than common good. So for me, I see it resolving in a number of ways, at least in the Nigerian Igbo context, as revisiting revitalizing these indigenous understandings of relationship. And in doing so, we may have to, by necessity, discard the ones that were imposed on us. We can try to reform it. We passed the Climate Act in 2021. That kind of reiterates government responsibility. But what's still happening is that people are implementing climate justice on the ground in their families, in their homes, and the ways that they choose to power their lives. And so one is going to have to give way to the other. I'm not sure that those two things can comfortably coexist or be blended together without some kind of damage being done. And that's just kind of where I come from.
Yes, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. Now I'd like to go on to kind of like a rapid fire question. We do want to leave some time for questions from the audience, but if I could ask you sort of quickly to tell us what initially interested you in issues of climate and the environment, and maybe what interested you or what helped you understand that imagination was a response, legitimate response to issues around the climate. So we'll go kind of fast, and we'll start with Libya, and at the end of this, we'll move into our Q&A period.
Well, science fiction was what brought me here, because I was in 2014 starting a group that is of art and science, El Cúmulo de Tesla, which is a collective group of scientists and artists and writers that we like science fiction, and we start to working together and to talk together, and we conform this group of study and writing. We had a book in Spanish, and we literally realized that if we work together, we work better, but also we can understand science fiction from another point of view, which is how about writing about the things that interest us as humans, and find a way to integrate multidisciplinary visions for that work. And also in Latin America, many writers have a tradition of seeing things from another point of view, because we have a rich history of indigenous populations and other languages and a lot of things. So that is pretty much in the speculative fiction that we work, and it's kind of, for me, it's very near. So it wasn't difficult to starting to think in that way, and then it became this etiquette that this is climate fiction, or this is environmentalism, and I was like, okay, it sounds like it's coherent to me, but it's a lot of things. It's a multicultural influences.
Beautiful. Azucena?
I think it was a realization of looking back at my own education when I went to primary school or high school, when I read literature or we were discussing works of art, like how anthropocentric our educational systems are. There's I have an example of a book, Pedro Páramo, which is a book in from Mexican tradition, a Mexican author. And when I read the book in high school, we talked about the patriarch there. There's a man, Pedro Páramo, and the love stories, but no one talked about drought in that place. That's the 40s and the beginnings of the Green Revolution. The people were living the rural areas because it was very drought. So it's a realization that those questions were not taken up in our education, and that has impacted me a lot. And now I'm also a teacher. I teach courses at university, and I start the course. I have a course that I'm teaching this term on the agricultures of the Southern Cone. And we read literature and we discuss different cultural expressions. And I start the course by showing them a grain of soya grain that I brought from Cordoba, where I'm from in Argentina. And I propose that we will look at the history of the agricultural histories of the Southern Cone through these soya grain. And so to move from the perceptions that we as humans are the centers of all of our stories, and to see that there are lots of relations with other beings for food, for energy production, for protection, for ways of inhabiting. So that's how I came to think of climate as a problem, or climate change as a problem, and climate justice as a method to see those relations in classrooms, or to change policies, or in different kinds of environments where we want change of the systems we are living in.
And Chinelo?
So my journey started in about 2010. In 2010, my family home flooded. So we had a home in Abuja, the capital city, and it flooded because we had higher than normal rainfall. That rainy season. And 2 years later, I was asked to do the base research for a documentary on climate change in Nigeria, and it had me going all over the country to different parts of the country to sort of talk to different people about what they were experiencing. In the northern part of Nigeria, there's increasing desertification, where the arid Sahara Desert is moving southward as we've gone through massive deforestation, agricultural practices that are deeply harmful, irrigation practices that basically drained Lake Chad, which was one of the largest freshwater lakes in the northern part of the country, and has led to these like cascading failures of environmental disaster, exacerbated by a changing climate. And in the south, you're seeing like increased rainfall that's causing erosion of coastal communities, particularly along the river Niger, and then rising sea levels as well, which is also like kind of so what's happening is this sort of gradual shrinking where more and more pressure is being pushed on populations in the far north and in the deep south. And there's also the ongoing degradation of the climate in the Niger Delta, where most of our oil is produced by multinational companies. And so that kind of got me into it. And I'm a speculative fiction author, so what I started to think about was I'm living in the dystopia now. What could happen if we got it right, or if we went a different way and things improved? So I've been doing a lot of work, especially lately, with the Africa Futures Project, which is a project that's bringing together experts, climate experts, environmental experts from all over the continent, and asking them, what does the continent look like if we if everything went exactly right? What is your wildest dream for the continent? What is the wildest, most imaginative thing you can think of if it goes well? And it's been so amazing to hear these people who have been kind of in the trenches working for the next day and the next day and the next day to like stand up and think 100 years ahead, 200 years ahead, 300 years ahead. If everything goes right, if everything goes well, if we find ways to get it right, what could the continent look like on its brightest day? And it's been such an amazing thing. So I do that on a personal level with like my short stories. And to see people doing this on sort of a more institutional level has been really, really amazing.
That's wonderful. In our Storing Just Futures project, we're using Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson's book, What If We Get It Right? And so we're loving that question, what if we get it right? So thank you so much. And Jen, when you're answering this question, could you mention your work with nuclear and
That's actually what I'm going to start with. Yeah.
and also policy, because we haven't really, I don't
Yeah.
think we've really mentioned policy so far. So if you could maybe speak a little bit to your relationship to those two things.
Yeah.
Nuclear and
Yeah.
policy.
Well, I'm going to go back to 2004 when I was just a baby grad student at UNM, and my summer job was working for the New Mexico Museum of Natural History and Science, and it was about taking middle schoolers and high schoolers off into the desert and forcing them to march up mountains against their will, and they'd rather be home doing Dance Dance Revolution. So I dragged this poor kid up the side of a mountain near Carlsbad, and I was like, "This is so beautiful. Your state is so beautiful. I can't believe how incredible this all is." And he was like, "Yeah, except there's a nuclear waste dump 30 miles that way." And I was like, what? No, there isn't. That can't be true. And that 13-year-old kid changed my life because I went home, of course, and was like, he must be making this up. And that's how I discovered that New Mexico does indeed have the waste isolation pilot plant. And I just was like, how do people not know about this? People need to know about this because this is the only quote unquote solution that we're putting forward for things that will be harmful to humans and the environment for thousands of years. And my major, like, I was so stunned by the hubris of looking at that landscape in whatever year, 1972 to 1999, being like, this is the place that will never change. We're going to put stuff under here and it will never be allowed to change, right? It has to stay the same. That's the whole premise of geologic repositories. And even though I'm not a scientist, and you can say, oh, she doesn't understand geology, therefore she doesn't understand how this works. People say that a lot. But there's also this sense of, again, that obligation that really hit me, the hubris of saying we will create an unchanging landscape because it suits our convenience, because it suits our narrative of controlling the environment, that we are the only ones with agency here on this planet. And I was just struck by that. It still makes me so angry and so enraged that we can make these kind of choices without thinking about that kid, right? I was like, what do you think about this? And he was like, I don't care. And I was like, that's okay, because I do. I now care very, very much. And I will care apparently for the rest of my life. And that shaped a lot of my, and back then in the 2000s, nobody was really thinking about nuclear. A lot of people were thinking about how to hide it in New Mexico. And now I find in 2025, all anyone wants to talk about is nuclear. And I think policy-wise, it's been a really interesting, I just finished the DOE project that actually funded our radioactive neighbors, to give credit where it's due. But it's been interesting too, because when we try to start projects to engage communities in trying to influence and inform a process for citing dangerous things like nuclear waste or, oil pipelines or whatever, we get a shift. And it's so scary to bring in the public. It's so threatening to this idea of going back to an imagined past that we can all somehow take part in, that we actually go against the ability to actually plan for the future itself. So my project was canceled in 2016, the first Trump election. The consent-based siting actually finished its cycle this year. We applied again for the funding under the Biden administration. And we were allowed to finish that project because the nuclear interests, corporately speaking, are so heavy that there has to be, and there's still some acknowledgement that communities will be the places where these things will be cited, hence these federal decisions creating really huge pressure points for communities to have to decide very quickly how they want this to fit into their future. And I'm like, let's stop here. Let's find a way to instantiate policies that actually bring communities to the table so they can talk about what they want the future to look like, and then what kind of energy producing facilities, because I do energy, they can actually have. Or they actually want, that are conducive to those futures that they are imagining for themselves. And this applies to like water, to waste, to any sort of, power hungry facility that you can have. But I was like, this is where the policy needs to be, needs to create that space of protection. We had it for a second and the Justice 40 initiative. And Joni, you and I were both part of that Director of Capture Hub that got canceled immediately. I was the J40, I was the community benefits person for J40 and diversity, equity, and inclusivity. So I got fired immediately from those grants. But it's interesting then that you can't cancel thinking about the future. You keep trying and saying, no, it's not important. No, we can't do this. No, it'll impede progress. And yet it's really the only thing, it's one of the things I think people really love to talk about. Like, how do you take yourself, what is the present for, if not to build a future that we can actually see ourselves living in together with some degree of getting it right, however we define, like even having the conversation of what right looks like is a really cool conversation. We should be having that, even if we can't achieve it in this moment, right? So I think of this as laying those stepping stones yet again for the people who come behind us and the people who will come after us, and to try and show we were thinking about this. We cared deeply, we cared greatly, and we tried to care correctly and rightly, and we did our best, right? I just want to leave that message. And I think this panel gives me a lot of hope. A lot of hope, maybe some reckless optimism here about doing that collectively. I think it's time to be a little more reckless.
Wow, we need radical hope right now. We only have one question so far in the Q&A, but let's see what we can do with this question. This is a question that I find comes up a lot in conversations around climate and environment, and that is, and the question is from James Bortoff. I'm sorry, James, if I pronounced your last name incorrectly, but James is interested in what you think about overpopulation. And we don't all have to answer this. Maybe one person or two.
I'm going to take that. I'd like to take. Let me get started. I think that overpopulation is a red herring. It's an absolute red herring, and it's been the cover for racist ideas of who gets to have too many children and who doesn't. When we talk about resource allocation and when we talk about energy, the most populous continent is sub-Saharan Africa, right? Yet we use, in terms of how much energy we consume, it is peanuts in comparison, right? One person in the United States is using 30 times the amount of energy as one person in the global south. And so what are we talking about when we talk about overpopulation? I think that it was a red herring to externalize anxieties that white folks have had for a very, very long time around if the wrong kind of people have too many kinds of children, then we will have to give something up, or we will be endangered because our colonialist policies will be turned on us somehow. So a way of controlling that is to say there are just too many people on Earth. That is simply not true. That is simply not true. We are on a planet that we evolved to thrive on. Literally, every part of our physiology has evolved to live and thrive on this particular planet. And so if we are not thriving on it, it is not because there's something going on with the planet. There's something going on with how we are treating it, or what we are doing to live on it. Historically, we've lived with a lot less. We have proven that we thrive with a lot less stuff. That's not to say that there are not modern technologies or modern innovations that have really improved the quality of our lives. Immunizations have meant that we don't lose every child you have before 5 years old. They don't have that level of child mortality, for instance. Antibiotics. But then again, when you're thinking about these kinds of things, you also have to think about access, who gets it and who doesn't. And when we talk about overpopulation, and when we think about, there's just not enough food to go around, or there's just not enough resources to go around, what we're really saying is there are not enough resources so that everybody can live in the state of overconsumption that a very few percentage of us live in. And somehow thinking that state of overconsumption, it should be the default to which we should all aspire to, that to me is the problem, not overpopulation. So when I hear people, and I've kind of gotten into trouble about this before, so I'm gonna tread a little carefully. When I hear people talk about the solution to climate crisis is to have fewer children, I really, really, really hesitate. I really hesitate when I hear that because, one, it is an incredibly nihilistic way of thinking about solution. If we create solutions and we're not doing it for the children that we're having, for the people coming behind us, who are we doing it for? Why are we? The question goes with Jennifer's question. Why? What is the point? if we're not doing this to secure the well-being of our future generations, what is the point? So if your solution is to keep everything exactly as it is, have no more children, we die out. We die out. I don't understand how there. I think I do understand, but I think it has to do with this acceptance of the myth of overpopulation. This acceptance that the wrong people are having too many babies, and those people are causing, and that's what's causing, the problems. Whereas what's actually causing our problems are the systems of consumption that we have put in place and normalized and said everybody should have deeply industrialized societies that are based on extraction, right? Deeply unequal societies in which somebody has to be poor. We just have to have, there's no way we can live without poor people. And that's simply not true. So we have locked ourselves into what the good life looks like, what progress should look like, what aspiration should look like. And then we blame the browner, poor members of our society for the damage that causes.
Thank you so much. When we talk about demographics here at Global Futures, your answer has been so comprehensive and so right on, according to what many professors are saying here, that I just want to thank you so much for that. Demographically, we know that there are many countries in which the population is already zero, or it's not growing up at all. And so I love your comment. If we don't have kids, then what's the future going to be like? So thank you so much. Now we have an embarrassment of riches in questions. So now I'm going to sort of rapid tell you about some of these questions, and then we'll just have we'll see if we can answer them as quickly as possible, because we actually don't have that much more time. So a question I'm going to throw at you is from Laura Randall, and she says, how do we as a global collective hold national leaders accountable for their actions to strip rights away from humans and nature? Essentially, how do we make international law enforceable on a global scale? The International Court of Justice has convicted Israel of genocide on the Palestinian people, and the U.S. federal and state governments supporting a domestic militia in their. Well, this is a timely question. So, and I think we've touched on it a little bit. Jen's touched on it a little bit, but who would like to take this question? How do we hold politicians accountable?
Very fast. Think before you vote. And if you are not convinced of what do you have, involve more, build community again, and try to come up with better solutions from inside and then from outside. I cannot think of international policy if here in Mexico I am seeing how the government is doing a lot of stuff that I don't agree with. So I have to start little by little, and then we can think of international laws. But I don't know, we start involving more ourselves into our politics landscape, I think.
Thank you. And now we have a question that is touching on the Climate Imagination book, which all of you are associated with. And so let me ask this question, and thank you, Neha Misra. Could you speak to what is a sense of place in poetry and poetics in your practice, of climate imagination, and what you can do to build more interdisciplinary bridges? Maybe since this one speaks so closely to climate imaginations, maybe we could have two people speak to this question, and maybe sense of place, climate imagination in your own practice.
Maybe I can have some insights about that question in the sense of in pedagogical practice that we do as those of us that teach. I teach Latin American cultural products or cultural studies. It's part of America, but it feels very far away from the States. In many cases, maybe not Mexico, but I teach mostly about the Southern Cone. So having a sense of place, it's sometimes not just teaching about the content about those places, but also like engaging the lived experiences of students in the places in where they are, in connecting themes or topics or risks or disasters in other places, the places where I teach in Latin America, with the disasters and the risks and the fears and the anxieties that students have in the places in which they are. And I think in that way you connect the lived experiences and the place-based understandings of what climate disaster is for students. And at the same time, it's necessary not to reduce experiences of other places and other people that are not in this particular place to what I feel or how I see the world. So coming together, but in difference, is something that Marisol de la Cadena has in a book, is coming together in experience of climate disasters and risks, but also conserving that there are different kinds of understandings and feelings and approaches. So coming together and collective, but also conserving difference and situatedness. So that would be an approach to a poetics of place and a politics of climate change.
Beautiful. Now I'm going to combine two questions because I think they're essentially asking somewhat the same thing. So I'm going to combine Indulata Prasad's question with Shreya and Uman's question. Both of them are associated with storing just futures. And they're both really interested in what makes hope or radical imagination not just an ideal, but a real solution. That was Indu. And here's Shreya. What is the one action that you could recommend to someone with limited agency within academia who wants to contribute to climate action policy making? So we'll take maybe 2 or 3 people on this one. It's a great one. I think they're asking, what are the real solutions beyond, what we're calling climate imagination, maybe even speculative fiction? What are the 1 or 2 sort of real solutions and or recommendations that you could make about real solutions in policy making? I see Chinello's hand is up.
I also saw Jen turned off her mic, so I don't know if you wanted to.
I'm happy to talk about it, but go ahead, Chinella.
Okay, let's have you both talk about it. And just briefly, because we're coming up on time.
I probably should have responded to it because I think it ties into the other question about holding governments accountable. And I think the question for me is to pay attention. So one thing that authoritarian systems and imperial systems are really good at doing is convincing us that there is no other solution, that this is all we see is all we see, and that all you can do is conform, all you can do is, survive. The thing is, though, there are people who are, even as we speak, making radical decisions, organizing in radical ways to change the system. And if you're interested in changing, what can be paralyzing is thinking, oh, I have to do it by myself somehow. I have to find a solution where I am. And if I don't do it, then it doesn't get done. It dismisses the reality that there is always somebody doing something. There's always somebody already organizing. They're already gathering people together. And even if they're not doing it where you are, they have created models that you can then adapt and adopt, right? So the idea that this is all there is and there's nothing you can do about it, conform, or you yourself, this individual, you make radical change, or it's not going to happen. So this is a false dichotomy that's placed on the individual by systems of oppression, whether those systems are white supremacy, patriarchy, colonialism, ableism, all kinds, from the largest to the smallest. They're replicated in our homes, in our individual relationships with each other. And then when it comes to solutions, they isolate you. They make you think that you're the only one that's feeling this way. And if you're the only one that's feeling this way, it is on you as an individual to change everything. So that's why I think we see so many stories where you have the single special hero guy who goes out and does the whole thing by himself. You don't see a lot of stories where actually he looks around and there's like a black and brown person doing something and he goes there and joins that coalition, or so I think that if you want to start making change, one thing you have to do is listen, is open your eyes, is look around, pay attention, because these things are happening, these stories are there. One great resource I like to use, there's two actually. Fix the News, which is a newsletter I get that looks at hope-based reporting, and focuses, not that it's ignoring, but the news that we are surrounded by operates, and I used to be a journalist, so I kind of I agree. It's sensationalist. It requires the news isn't man, dog bites man, it's man bites dog, right? So it looks for the unusual, it looks for the catastrophic, it looks for the sensationalist, and it amplifies that. What's actually happening is there are smaller stories of incremental progress. There are smaller stories of organization, of solidarity building that are going far, far below the radar. And it is on you as a person who wants to commit themselves to that radical change to pay attention to what is actually happening. So you're living in a city that has, let's say, a homeless shelter 2 doors down. You can stop there and ask what they need, and start there. You can walk into your nearest, church or community and talk to someone that you haven't ever talked to before. You see that person who always seems to be at the center of everything. Have you ever had a conversation with that person? What are they doing? What could they need? What kind of resources could you bring to existing systems of solidarity and progress? Because radical change is already taking place. Radical subversions of these systems are taking place, and they're usually being done by Black, brown, female, female-coded, female-bodied, gender diverse people. It is the responsibility that you have isn't to make that change yourself. It is to plug yourself into the communities and systems and movements and organizations that are already doing the work, and transform them that way, or replicate them in your backyard. So that's what I would, and if you want to hold your governments accountable, if you want to hold these like terrible people doing terrible things accountable, that's how you do it. You start with what's around you. You start with the people already doing the work, and you plug yourself in.
Thank you. Now I'm going to ask everyone on the panel to actually name a story that you would like everyone to go out and read. So to name the title of a story, but before we do that, quickly to sort of take ourselves to the end of this session, Jen, did you have anything quickly that you wanted to add on that same thing?
I just wanted to say, and to Sreya's question, to repeat Chinelo too, look local. Like there are students who need help on our campus right now, and all you have to do is ask. You just have to ask around, and then think really carefully about what protections you can offer, like what privileges you can expand to others, and then where you are at risk for your positionality. And I think we will start to find, we already have these kinship and affinity-based networks here. I like about local to global justice, which is like a local scholar activist community that's been flying under the radar now for 25 years at ASU, but it's gone through since 9/11. It's been hanging around. And so I think exactly fighting the isolationism that comes through all these narratives, overpopulation, global disarray, all this stuff. But at the local part, that's where our hearts live and where they lie. And I think that's where we'll find the nourishment to keep us going here.
Beautiful. So what's your title?
All right. This article, I just found out that a friend published it in December. I think it's called The Mind-Bending Challenge of Warning Future Humans About Nuclear Waste.
Love it.
Scientific American. So
and Libya,
into the science fiction.
And Libya, what's your title?
Cosmic Fire, which is a novelette in climate imagination, dispatches from Hopeful Futures, which the ASU it's put online a couple of years ago, and now the MIT Press just published back in December. So read it. It's by Mexican writers and a collective with scientists. So yeah.
Thank you. As you said, I think you put yours in the chat, right?
Yeah.
Tell us the title.
So it's a semilla, like seed now, and it's a visual and a poetic work by Chilean poet Cecilia Vicuña. So it's a collection of different seeds. Not some of them are organic and you can plant them, but some of them are the skin of the seed or parts of the seed is broken from a place in Chile that was the diversity, plant diversity was replaced by monoculture, and she makes a visual and a poetic work out of that. And what it's interesting is like, this is not a science fiction or a futuristic story, but in the poem, each of these seeds is presented as a ship that can take you to different kinds of worlds and then open different kinds of futures. And it's also like a statement for diversity and food sovereignty. So I really invite you to look at the video. And also there's a collection of poems and visual art connected to that.
Wonderful. Joey just put a link in the chat, so look at that. And Chanello, you will take us to the end of the session with the title that you would like to recommend.
So the title there are a couple of things, but I realize that both of them are not published yet. So I will talk about the one that is. It's a short story called Ancestor's Gift, and it is written by a Nigerian writer named Chisom Ume. And it's a story that is about these scientists who are coming into a isolated community that is somewhere in the future, and the community itself has reverted to ancestral indigenous practices to restore its ecology. And so these scientists from a Western coded place are coming in to see like this miracle of restoration and ecology. And what they don't understand is that it is not a project. It is literally these people's kind of recovering these systems of understanding, belief, and relationship. And it was originally sent in for this project I was working on called oh my God, it was run, but never mind. It didn't get through, but it is an amazing story that kind of talks about kind of what I've been interested in terms of recovery, in terms of re-understanding relationships and restructuring how we deal with and how we relate to our natural environment by recovering kind of lost or suppressed understandings that were, present in pre-colonial labor society. So I think it's excellently written.
Those were wonderful last words. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. Thank you so much to the CSI. Thank you to all the Storing Just Futures affiliates and organizers. And thank you, audience, everyone, for your questions and for coming today. It was just really a fantastic day. Thank you so much. And bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone.